Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Women in Manufacturing Association's Hear Her Story podcast. My name is Allison Graylis and I am the president and founder of the Women in Manufacturing Association and Education Foundation. As your host, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our guest for this episode, Sandra McNeil. Sandra is the Director of Operations at Amazon Robotic Sortable Fulfillment. Prior to joining Amazon, she was the first African-American female manufacturing chief engineer at General Motors. Her work has sent her all over the globe, where she has championed the expansion of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the STEM career fields. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you, Allison. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you today and to be part of this great podcast. I love the hustle and bustle of manufacturing operations. And as you mentioned, I have a passion for promoting women in STEM, and I can't think of a better way to do that than to share her story. And you've had an incredible guest list on this podcast, and I'm humbled to share this space with other amazing leaders, and then hopefully also inspire others to believe in themselves and pursue any career in STEM, really.
Excellent. We're thrilled to have you here. And again, we appreciate you taking the time to share your story with our audience. So before we hop into your current manufacturing career and some of the amazing work that you're doing in your current position, I wanted to step back and maybe talk a little bit about your early upbringing. So I know many of us are influenced at an early age by teachers or by certain classes that we took or by just special interests. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what were some of those early influences for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a great question. And I imagine, like many of the listeners out there, I am truly multifaceted. In fact, my husband often tells me that I have at least 3 different personalities, but I think that is a discussion for a different podcast. So I actually am an Air Force brat. I was born and raised in Germany, and I did not move to the US until I was 11 years old. And while we lived on the Air Force Base, I was actually enrolled in German school from kindergarten until we moved to the US when I was in 6th grade. My mom wanted my brother and I to be able to understand the German culture and to be able to communicate with her side of the family. So we were actually bused off base to German school. So I'm what many would consider a third culture child, which is really a mix of, German, American, and that kind of third culture that we end up forming based on our life experiences. Growing up this way really exposed me to a number of different extracurricular activities as a child, I would say. I was part of a German swim club, and a fun fact about me, I actually used to be part of an accordion club. So yes, I am German and I play the accordion. I also played the German flute, or what is known in English as a recorder, and the piano. I was also very active in dance, so ballet, tap, gymnastics, and I actually thought I wanted to be a ballerina when I grow up. And then I was also, because we lived on base, we had access to like the Girl Scouts. So I was also a brownie. And that exposed me then a little bit more to like science in the STEM field and really piqued my interest. And at one point, I also thought I wanted to become a scientist as a child. So I'm very grateful in how intentional my parents were in exposing my brother and I to a multitude of extracurricular activities across arts, sports, and academics. And they also were very intentional in making sure that math was fun, because I think they understood math is kind of foundation to a lot of different things. And if you can stick in math and enjoy that, then there's a lot of different opportunities that are open to you in the future.
What an interesting background. So to grow up on base, to have a multitude of different extracurriculars that you participated in, and then also to be part of that multicultural background with German and all of those influences. So as you lived on base and as you then pursued kind of your education in elementary and post-elementary and secondary school, what were the things that led you to kind of first job? And I guess, what did you pursue in college? Did you have a field that you immediately felt like, hey, I want to gravitate towards this or really like this?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, my dad was in the Air Force and he was unfortunately diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer my sophomore year in high school. And during that time, he had asked me to consider going to the Air Force Academy. So, I applied and I was actually accepted into their computer engineering program. I had no idea what an engineer was, but I knew computers were important for the future. And I then actually decided to stay closer to home after my father passed to support my family. And I ended up pursuing a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Oklahoma State University instead. I was a first generation college student. Actually, my mom went back to school after my father passed, and we were in college at the same time. She chose to go to the University of Oklahoma. And while I wanted to stay close to home, I did not want to live at home. So I went to Oklahoma State University because that was a little bit further of a drive where I would not have to be living where I grew up. And I'll be honest, I never really considered any sort of career in manufacturing. The only thing I knew about manufacturing is what I had seen in movies. And it seemed like a dark, dingy, and dirty place with a lot of angry men running around. And so I actually had aspirations of becoming a genetic scientist and even had considered studying biomedical engineering as a master's degree. Then my freshman year, I went to a career fair at Oklahoma State University and ended up as an engineering intern at the General Motors manufacturing plant in Oklahoma City that summer. And the site had a fantastic intern program and really built and maintained very strong relationships with their interns. And that's how I actually ended up starting my career in manufacturing. General Motors had a great support system. The site had a great leadership development and mentorship program. And I just fell in love with a mix of tech and people and just the ambiguity that you face in frontline operations, right? You may have a plan for what your day is going to look like, but until you walk into the building, you never know what sort of problems you will need to tackle that day. And whether that's, attendance issues, people issues, labor issues, technical issues, mechanical breakdowns, or maybe it is a great day and there's no fires you have to go fight. I just love the diversity and how dynamic life and operations can be.
So, you share a similar story to something that we've heard from many women, that they never designed to be in manufacturing, nor had it been a pathway that they necessarily had planned, but that they've made their way into manufacturing. And so often it is through this internship opportunity. Do you see that being a leverage that your current employer uses as well? That this intern and kind of campus recruiting is still a great way to fill the pipeline? And what are the intern programs, if there are any, at Amazon like present day?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a firm believer in internship programs. And actually, I think you have to start sooner. I think if you wait until if you're able to do high school, that's great. But even that's sometimes kind of late if people have already self-opted out of science and or mathematics. It's really hard to get caught up then. And so I'm really a big fan of different programs that actually go to engage younger children in elementary school, junior high school, and high school, to just expose them to the different career possibilities there are, and then to help support them through that interest. And so Amazon has this program called Amazon Future Engineering Program, where they support local schools with computer science resources to help keep that interest. And it also includes like career chats or career explorations, and then also internships available. But I'm a big fan of internships. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And I think there's no better way than to get in there and understand, what is it like? Because as I mentioned, if it had not been for my internship, I would never have considered a career in manufacturing or even a career in operations. And it wasn't until I got into my internship and then I started working there and I've had a phenomenal career in all different kinds of fields, always within the manufacturing operations umbrella, but it's been pretty diverse. And I don't think that I had any exposure or understanding of how many doors would be open and the different possibilities you would have in the STEM field.
So director of operations seems like it probably is a pretty big role, and I'm sure pretty complex. So what does a day in the life look like? Or what are some of the common things that you're doing as director of operations in the Amazon robotics sortable fulfillment space?
Yeah, it's pretty much what it sounds like. Everything from ensuring, our plans for our production for the day is set. We have the resources to do that, and then tackling any barriers that we may have and making sure, most importantly, I'm removing the barriers for my team so that we can be successful. And it doesn't matter whether that's in a manufacturing or Amazon fulfillment warehouse. Our number one job as a leader is supporting our team and making sure they have the tools to be successful, and then tackling whatever the issue of the day is. Yesterday, we had to take shelter because of a tornado. So you just never know what may happen at any given day. But that's the great thing as a director. You have that ability to make sure that you have the right resources in the right place at the right time, and then you're supporting your team.
I know that in your position and title, it talks about robotic sortable fulfillment. So I think, I've worked in the manufacturing space now for more than 20 years. And Amazon, I think, was the first location and facility tour I ever did where I saw robotics in action. So being an early adopter to using robotics, what does the future look like for using robotics? Are you folks looking at expansion of how to use automation and other technologies to help with your operations?
Yeah, I think similar to any other company, there's a lot around innovation, and innovation is kind of in the culture of Amazon and in the DNA. So we constantly continue to try to iterate and learn and see what we can do to improve things. But I think in any operations, everyone's trying to find that mix of tech and people working together in harmony. And that's something we're going to continue to need. I think if we look at the workforce staffing shortages that many of us have faced throughout the pandemic, whatever you can do there to supplement with automation or use automation to help make better decisions for your operations. We're all trying to be more efficient in everything that we do so that ultimately we can deliver for our customers.
So as you have gone through now a career where you've gone from automotive to now Amazon, have there been challenges that you faced along the way? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yes. In terms of challenges, there has been no shortage of challenges throughout my career. However, overall, I would say it's been a very positive experience, both in manufacturing and now where I am in customer fulfillment. And I've had a phenomenal career, better than what I could have even imagined, or like you mentioned earlier, designed for myself. I'm very grateful for the strong foundation I was able to build in manufacturing, and most importantly, my confidence and figuring out who I am as a leader and how I show up and how I can be effective. But I think if we look at the Lean In and McKinsey studies for women in the workplace, we still have a lot of work to do. And the things that are described in those studies are absolutely my story. There has been no shortage of bias or isms I have experienced throughout my career, especially as a Black woman in tech or manufacturing. Unfortunately, people are not always kind and won't always support you. And our workplace is a reflection of the communities in which we live. And unfortunately, my experience is not unique, right? In fact, it mirrors very much what those studies, and I think that study has been going on for 8 years, has been describing as what are some of the barriers, what are some of the experiences for women, what are some of the experiences for women of color. And that is absolutely true, which is also, I was part of the Great Resignation, Awakening, or Great Breakup, whatever you want to call it, that's been going on the last 2 years as well. And I also decided to pivot in the midst of COVID.
So you speak of a few different things that I'd probably like to hop into some further discussion on. So the first is that great, I think I've often heard of it, is that great reevaluation.
Mhm.
So women, 2 million plus women reevaluating, what am I doing professionally? And how does this stack up with my professional goals and my priorities and my values? And so for you, as you made that shift, what were some of the things that you reevaluated? Like, what were the things that you said, you know what, I need to find alignment here? And was there an overriding thing that was kind of a key decision maker for you to make a pivot or change professionally?
I think for me, it was a couple of different variables. So I definitely have very lofty career aspirations. I would love to become a CEO in the future. And I think what we've also seen in the last few years, the skill sets that are required have pivoted somewhat and changed, just because if you look at the amount of uncertainty, volatility, change, and ambiguity we've had just in the last 4 years compared to the prior years to that, it's been at an accelerated pace. And while General Motors absolutely was a phenomenal company, great support system, and has built me into the leader I am today, I also wanted to see what it would be like in a more, what I would deem, innovative and less restrictive environment, just because the regulatory requirements are completely different. And understand, how does a company like Amazon drive that innovation? And then for me, it was the leadership principles from Amazon that really resonated with me. But that was one variable. And then also, similar to everyone else in the midst of COVID, I was in Michigan. I didn't have any family there. It was the Midwest. My husband was experiencing a lot of racism. I was also experiencing things that were not so nice. And we wanted to get back home. And there was an opportunity to do that as well. So we decided to pack up the dogs and drive to Texas in the midst of a pandemic and get back home and get closer to family. And there was just something inside of me as well that said that was the right time to do it. And I'm very grateful I did, because unfortunately, I recently lost my mom this year. And I'm glad that we did make that decision and we were here and we were able to be with her, because I couldn't imagine trying to support a parent through hospice or being ill when you're states away. So again, it was something internally inside of me that just told me I have to go do it. And now's the time to do it. And it just happened to coincide with everything else that was going on. And like you said, that great reevaluation. And we just, for my husband, for myself, for my family, it was just better to get closer to home.
You've had quite the journey, and during this pandemic, post-pandemic period, and I so believe in us women, especially trusting our gut. And it sounds like something was telling you, hey, something's not aligned here. I think it's time for me, spouse, to get back home to where family is. And I think this reevaluation period, I hope, is for the better for so many of these women who have left the workforce. I think it's forcing companies to reevaluate themselves and say, what's amiss here? Why are we losing people? Is it our cultural way that we do business? Is it the types of communities that we're espousing within our facilities and factories? And so I do think it's hopefully going to lead to some positive change. And I think we've already seen some positive change happen at manufacturing companies because of the people who have left and said, things got to be better. We're holding you as entities to some better standards here for the future. And not saying that all companies were bad by any means, but there were just some things that needed some improvement. And hopefully that improvement's happening across the board.
WIM North is back. Start 2023 right by investing in yourself and your manufacturing career. Join us live in Dearborn, Michigan, or virtually to learn from industry thought leaders based in the Northern U.S. while developing connection with peers in your region throughout this day-long conference. Speakers from Cummins, Magna, George Utes, just to name a few, will discuss topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, strategic leadership, the importance of mentorship, industry innovations, and more. Early bird rates are available through February 15th. Register now at womeninmanufacturing.org.
You also spoke about the unique challenges of women of color in manufacturing. I know it's something you and I have talked about before. I think we've had some discussions about it when Women in Manufacturing Association, to which we are thrilled to have you as part of our board of directors on, we had created our diversity, equity, and inclusion task force, and we talked very passionately, and I know you in particular talked very passionately about the unique challenges of women of color in manufacturing. And, having some of those real difficult conversations around their unique challenges. Talk a little bit about that, and how are you working to change the experience for women of color in the future in manufacturing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges is that you can easily lose yourself. I think a lot of the studies, there's a lot of data around it, that women, especially women of color, are least likely to receive constructive feedback or any sort of feedback that they can do anything with. You're often told, oh, you're too aggressive, abrasive. Oh, you're not a leader, you're too quiet. Where eventually you feel like, okay, if I speak up, it's a problem. If I don't, it's also a problem. How do I need to be? And you end up losing yourself. And that can be a very challenging environment, especially if you are the only as well. So who do you go to? Who do you seek out that may understand what it is like to walk in your shoes, how you are treated differently? It can be very hard and you can end up losing yourself. And that's why I'm such a huge advocate for, number one, educating everyone that the barriers are just not the same. You cannot discount that intersectionality of whether it's being gender and ability, or gender and a disability, or gender and religion, or gender and racial background. What happens in society today, and we can just turn on the TV or look at any kind of social media feed, the same thing happens at work, because what lives out there works in our environments. And the days of just asking people to leave their own personal opinions, views, baggage, emotional distress at home, those days are over. It's spilling over into work. And so unfortunately, sometimes there's some very not so nice behaviors that happen, and you can just lose yourself if you feel like you don't have a support system. And so I work very hard to just be visible, to let people know, my journey has not been easy. Yes, I've had a phenomenal career, and hopefully I will still have another 20 plus years of a phenomenal career, but it has not been easy. But I also have not been at this alone. I've had a great support system of diverse people of different backgrounds that have supported me and helped me through that. And so if I can be that inspiration to someone that maybe is somewhere where they don't see someone like them, or someone with a similar personality like them in their work environment, to let them know that you can still be successful. You just have to stay true to yourself. You have to understand where your blind spots may be, and then just continue to develop in the best version of you. And then people will buy into you as a person first before they buy into you in your message. And that's one of the first things I learned when I read John C. Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And so if you just continue to focus on becoming the best version, the most authentic version of yourself, you are a leader. Leaders come in many different forms, and that's okay. But I think sometimes the messaging we get doesn't support that viewpoint.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think I love that you mentioned authenticity and being genuine. And I think that's so important. You can read a huge amount of books and you can listen to every leadership podcast on the planet, but you have to be your own authentic self as a leader, changing yourself to look just like what you've seen maybe as other past leadership examples doesn't work, because you have to be spirited and excited and be passionate about those things that you're working on. And you can't transplant that into someone else's interests, passions, and motivators. And that genuine piece is so important. People are going to see through when you're not authentic as a leader. And so it's important to kind of come into your own skin, but develop your skills individually as you rise the ranks in your companies. And you talked a little bit too about your favorite book, inspiration, people who have inspired you along the way. I know on this podcast, we often talk about mentorship and sponsorship and advocacy. Did you have examples of that? And were you influenced by that? And did that help your career along the way? Certain mentors and sponsors and advocates?
Oh, absolutely. When I started my career in manufacturing, I was a shy, introverted individual. And like I said, I'm very fortunate that I started where I did, because they really built that solid foundation in me, from building my confidence as well as to leadership development. And early on, we were assigned mentors. One of my earliest mentors was actually the plant manager, Russ Youngs of the Oklahoma City manufacturing plant. And even there, the department was very focused on leadership development. The first leadership book I was given to read was Zap, The Lightning of Empowerment. And then John C. Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. We talked about gung ho. So leadership development was at the core of what General Motors was doing from an operations standpoint. And that definitely helped shape who I was. And then the leaders that I was exposed to, it was a very diverse environment there in Oklahoma City. And they were also very, very intentional in that when we had to do the dog and pony shows, guess who was selected to talk? The shy and introverted young intern, so that you could get more comfortable speaking in front of leadership teams and exposure to leadership teams. But throughout my career, I've had so many phenomenal mentors as well as sponsors. I did not get and have not had some of the opportunities if it hadn't been for some of the sponsors. And then last but not least, what greater role models than to work directly with and watch a Mary Barra in action or an Alicia Bowler Davis in action, right? I can't think of a better university to go to to study what it's like as a strong female leader than what I've been exposed to overall throughout my career, including here at Amazon.
So you talked a little bit earlier in our conversation around STEM and kind of that as an early influence. And you also spoke about you through Girl Scouts or Brownies having kind of first gotten that introduction or taste of the kind of STEM opportunities and maybe careers. How can others who are listening today, or what might be your recommendations around how they can promote STEM, and especially in the underserved communities?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, especially if your company is struggling in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know during the pandemic, a lot of people did a lot of recruiting, but I'm not sure how much retaining they did as well, right? And that's usually an indicator that there may be something in the culture or in the systems in your company that need to be investigated a little bit further. And so my first piece of advice would be to listen. I often, when I do speak at conferences around fostering cultures of inclusion, I talk about the platinum rule, which is meeting people where they are. Try to understand the barriers from someone else's lens, and then go back and understand what systems or processes might need to be revisited or changed, versus making assumptions from the way you experience the world on what the issues may be, and then designing solution towards your experiences versus the barriers that underrepresented typically face. And a lot of barriers are actually very systemic, right? And so I think we can't continue with the same approach and then wonder why we are not getting results. There's no shortage of data. There's no shortage of nonprofit organizations, no different than women in manufacturing, that are focused on uplifting underrepresented or those in underserved communities. So engage, be part of the change you wish to see, and engage, be visible, and then do what you can to understand and then work towards removing those systemic barriers. And last but not least, as we talked through earlier, I think it's very important to provide that exposure, right? It's often the lack of exposure that limits underserved communities. So being visible, letting them know what are the different career opportunities and career paths, right? Not everything has to go through a 4-year college degree. There's other avenues, and I know we talk a lot around apprenticeship as well, to have a successful career in STEM. So help expose underserved communities to those different possibilities, and you have to do it early. Grade school, junior high school, high school. And then if you are able to have programs that help support, then do that. And I know a lot of large corporations do have great programs. And so that would be my advice.
That's great advice. And I think as we talk about manufacturing openings, I think present day, there's close to 900,000 open manufacturing positions. So I think it's not just a good thing, but a necessary thing for companies to evaluate, and as well the individual leaders and contributors at companies to evaluate how can you connect to your communities, including especially those that are underserved, to introduce them to manufacturing and these careers and these opportunities for them to support their families, to support themselves, to be, sustainable. And I think making those partnerships and having partnerships with community colleges and educators and counselors and community centers and all of those things are a necessity. You can't not be doing those things if you want to be creating a pipeline of people that want to come work for your company and your organization. And as you keep saying, others who've been on this podcast keep saying, we have to do it younger and younger. It's got to be at these early ages that we're making that impression to these individuals that there are other things out there than what you may have thought of as the traditional careers of being a doctor, an attorney, an accountant, all of these things that you hear profiles about it in a very early age. What about being that manufacturing engineer? And I think we've come a long way from when I was in elementary school. We didn't talk about engineering back when I was in elementary school. I now have a almost 16 and an almost 17-year-old, and my daughter wants to go into physics and potentially be an astrophysicist or engineer. And I don't think that would have even been on my radar when I was in elementary school. So I think we're making progress, but there's a lot more to be done, and especially in those underserved communities, so that they realize there are all of these different things you can get into, and many of which, and most of which, you can have a great career and support yourself very nicely doing.
Absolutely. And I think what we've also seen in the pandemic, right, there's no one-stop shop. Just because you start your career in one way or one direction or one field doesn't mean you can't pivot. And we've seen a lot of people pivot fields later on in their careers as well. So just don't limit yourself. But I think it has to start with that exposure and just sharing stories, sharing the possibilities, and then let people design their own career paths, because it changes.
So true. And I think so much of it, and not to put more pressure on educators, because I know they already have a heck of a lot of pressure and they're underpaid and under-recognized. But so often in these conversations that I'm having on both this podcast and just when I'm talking to our member community and manufacturing companies, so often it was that first point of influence with an educator, seeing a skill set that a student has and saying, I think you would be great in engineering or great in manufacturing or in operations or supply chain or human resources. It's amazing that the influences, if they're not getting it at home, that the hugely impactful influences that an early educator can have. So, I think that's down the road, something that we should be talking about as a board and association. How do we have more interrelationships with the educators and the people forming and molding the kids of the future, because they are forever changed and marked by those people that have early influences on them in the classroom. So as we wrap up our conversation, Sandra, we often like to end with some rapid fire questions. And so we will first start with, what is your favorite quote and why?
Yeah, so I think one quote that I have, and I actually have on my profile here at work, on my job profile, is, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world.
That is a great quote. And who is it from? Do you know?
It's unknown. I don't know how I came across that. I think during the pandemic, I was like, every week I had like a different email signature quote. And this is one that has stuck with me, and I absolutely love it. And I try to live by that, because again, I think as a Black woman, there's often others that like to put limits on you. And I think this quote just speaks for itself.
Where was the last place you traveled?
Nashville. I've been traveling back and forth between Texas and Nashville lately, and it's great. Like, just the change in Nashville has been amazing, and you can't go wrong with some great Southern foods and just the music. I don't care. You can be at a Starbucks and there's this like great recording artist. You're like, what is happening here? So the music in Nashville is just phenomenal. I love it.
Yeah, it is such a different place than 20 years ago. I mean, it is nutty. I remember a good girlfriend moved there right after college, and we're like, Nashville, Tennessee, why would you want to go there? And now look at it 20 years later, it is the place to be, and such a different location. And what resolutions have you set for yourself? Any resolutions you're going to be setting for yourself professionally or personally?
Absolutely. Both professionally and personally. Boundaries. I've had a very challenging last few years. And as I said, my work-life harmony is out of whack. And in some ways, I've actually lost myself. And I'm sure I'm not unique in that aspect. So My New Year's resolution is about making myself a priority again and making time for the things that I enjoy, which also includes sitting on my back porch and watching the cows in the pasture behind my house. They're not my cows, but I do find it very soothing and relaxing as they're out there, I guess, grazing and then taking a dip in the marsh behind my house. But yeah, it's just finding myself again and making time for me. And a lot of that has to do with the boundaries that I'm not setting for myself or willing to negotiate my own boundaries. So I need to make myself a priority again.
That's really important advice. And I think many of us women need to make ourselves a priority in our lives because other things can quickly eat up our time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes without our consent, or I guess with our consent, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So what is one piece of advice that you would share with the next generation and current generation of women in manufacturing?
I think we already touched upon it a little bit during our discussion, but not everyone will support you or understand you, and that is okay, right? Just don't let others set limits for you. If you believe in yourself and you are willing to learn from failures and not ruminate on them, you can thrive and become unstoppable. And I think that's something I try to live by in my career. It's fail fast, fail forward, learn from that, continue to develop in the best version of yourself, and you will be just okay.
What great advice, Sandra. It's been such a delight to talk to you today. And I so appreciate all that you do for women in manufacturing, both us as an industry and our association. And so appreciate your time today and you sharing some insights and inspiration to our listeners. So thanks so much, Sandra. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Allison. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you for listening to Hear Her Story, a podcast produced by the Women in Manufacturing Association. Be sure to share, review, and subscribe to Hear Her Story on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen.